Hello and welcome. Today we're going to dive into a really powerful and honestly kind of counterintuitive idea. What if the most difficult parts of our inner lives, the crises, the anxieties, the anger, what if those aren't obstacles to awakening, but are actually the path itself?
So let's start with this big question. Just think about it for a second. In your own life, when that wave of anxiety or anger or grief starts to rise, what's your first instinct? For most of us, it's to push it away, right? To get back to calm, to get back to normal. But what if that whole impulse is missing the point? What if the turbulence itself is where the magic is?
And that's just the reality, isn't it? Our inner world is rarely this calm, straight line. It's more like a storm tide, this constant churn of emotions and thoughts. We spend so much energy trying to flatten those waves, trying to run from the storm. But today, we're exploring a completely different way, a way that teaches us to lean into the storm.
Now, this approach, it isn't some new age concept. It's actually a very ancient and, frankly, radical idea. And it's captured perfectly in this Japanese Buddhist principle, Bonnō soku Bodai. The translation here is what's so striking. Defilements are awakening. Notice it doesn't say they lead to awakening, it says they are awakening. This is profound. It means we don't need to get rid of the waves of our mind. We just need to realize that the waves are the way awakening moves, the way it expresses itself.
And this idea has some seriously deep roots. I mean, way back in the 6th century, the Buddhist master Zhiyi gave this incredibly practical advice. He said, when your meditation gets stormy, when anger flares up, don't just grit your teeth and force your attention back to your breath. He says to stop and turn your attention directly toward the anger itself. This is a huge shift. It's not about suppressing it, and it's not about indulging it. It's about honest, direct seeing.
And then you fast forward a few centuries, and the 13th century monk, Nichiren, echoes this exact same truth, but he states it even more starkly. The point isn't to escape the cycle of suffering, to find nirvana somewhere else. No. Nirvana, enlightenment, it's found right here, in the middle of the raw, messy reality of our lives. Okay, so that's the ancient wisdom. But how do we make sense of this today, in our modern world? Well, a really powerful metaphor comes from Joshua Schrei's Emerald podcast, which talks about a planetary roar and a natural recurring cycle that pretty much governs everything. This cycle is described in 3 simple stages. First, there's accumulation, a building up of energy, kind of like a gestation. Then comes the rupture, the break, the birth, the big crisis moment. And finally, there's release, an unveiling, a renewal. This pattern is everywhere, in nature, in societies, and most importantly for our conversation, inside each and every one of us. And here's the kicker. If this cycle is so fundamental to life, then our spiritual practices can't just be about the quiet, peaceful part at the end. They have to embrace the whole thing, the buildup, the messy rupture, the roar. A real ritual takes us right to that world-ending moment inside ourselves and shows us how to find renewal right there. Okay, so this sounds really powerful in theory, but how do we actually do it? How do we put this idea into practice when our own inner storm hits? Well, let's put it side by side. The old way, the suppression way, is basically a fight. We try to flee to some quiet place, we force our mind back when it wanders, and we basically end up exiling the parts of ourselves we don't like. But the path of honest seeing, totally different. We turn towards the feeling, we get curious about it, and we let our sense of calm get wider, big enough to hold the turbulence, not get rid of it. So here's your practical guide. First, just stop forcing a technique that obviously isn't working. Instead, turn your curiosity directly toward that emotion. Look at the anger or fear. Watch its texture, see how it arises and how it passes. You'll start to see that it doesn't have a solid, fixed core. And that very act of seeing is the calm. It's a spaciousness that can hold the movement without being destroyed by it. So think about a practice like chanting or any ritual you might have. In this new model, its purpose isn't to be an escape hatch from your feelings. It's to create a container, something sturdy enough to hold all of it, the grief, the rage, the anxiety. The rhythm, the breath, they allow these huge energies to move through you without tearing you apart. Nichiren has this just stunningly beautiful way of putting it. He says, we use our suffering, birth, aging, sickness, death, to adorn ourselves. Our struggles aren't things to be hidden away in shame. They become the jewels, the intricate carvings on the sacred architecture of our own lives.
They become part of the very revelation of who we are. All right, now let's zoom all the way out, because this inner work has massive implications for our collective world. This isn't just about finding personal peace. It's about how we weather this current global moment together. This brings up a really crucial question. What happens when an entire society refuses to engage with this inner cycle? When we all collectively refuse to process our grief, our fear, our rage, well, that energy doesn't just vanish. It gets projected outward. It gets enacted on the world stage.
And the result is a kind of planetary mirror. You know, our biggest disruptions, from the climate emergency to all the deep political division, you can see them as a reflection of our collective failure to handle these forces within. We're basically playing out our unresolved inner chaos on a global scale.
So when you boil it all down, this entire practice is a shift in perspective. The goal isn't to just grit your teeth and get past the hard stuff. It's to turn towards it, to get to know it, and finally, to recognize it as a raw, unfiltered expression of life, as a facet of awakening itself.
The author of the source material, Nichiryu Mark Herrick, puts the result of this practice so beautifully. He says that what was once a destructive force that scattered his attention and energy becomes, through this practice of honest seeing, the very current that carries him forward, back to a place of compassion and responsibility.
So we'll end with this question for you to take with you. What would it actually mean to practice this? To stop running from the wave, to stop trying to climb over it, but instead to plant your feet right where it breaks and find your voice from that exact place of power, rupture, and renewal.